Welcome, listeners, to episode 14 of the Real Takes Tennis podcast. A long hiatus for us. We've been hard at work trying to get our next guest on, and we're very happy that he managed to fit some time into his schedule in order to talk to us. I've known this guy for a little bit of time, and we're super happy that he was able to come on just to set the stage. We're talking about a University of Pacific superstar who got 62 singles wins, 63 doubles wins. His senior year was the All West Coast Conference, All Academic Team Selection, and West Coast Player of the Year. We're catching him at a really good time. He's had 3 Challenger titles this year, which I believe is the most for this season, or sorry, the most he's had in each season, and 11 overall. Career high of 104 on the ATP doubles circuit, and my personal favorite, last but not least, one of the feistiest general managers in the fantasy basketball landscape. I mean, we can talk later about the type of ridiculous trades this dude was sending me, but the real listeners know that he had Woj's number saved and was making pickups at ridiculous times of the night. So ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to introduce Sem Verbeek. Sem, what's up, man? Pleasure to have
Hey
you on the
guys.
pod.
Yeah, thanks so much. I hope I can bring my managerial skills also into my talking skills. I miss those basketball days though. That was
Yeah,
fun. But
yeah.
happy to be here. Thank you for having me on.
No, of course. I had to end with that one. I wanted to start it off before we got on, but I was like, no, we'll save it. We'll save it for the end because we had it for the rest of the listeners. We had a chat with not Sem, but as well as other UOP tennis guys as well, and the pickups that were being made at odd hours of the night were. I mean, there was no. I think you won that league, didn't you? Like because yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, you got to take advantage of the time difference sometimes.
Yeah.
If you're somewhere in Europe or like in Asia or something, and you can you
Yeah.
can or you can leverage that that time zone difference.
Yeah.
You got to do it.
100%. Let's dive right into it. I mean, we honestly we want to start off chronologically. Is how we like to do this. So I mean we've talked about this before, but just to set the stage again, like talk to us a little about like how you got started in tennis and what life was like in terms of playing growing up in the Netherlands.
Yeah. Like you said, I grew up in Amsterdam. I started playing soccer at a young age, like most young boys do in Europe. And tennis really didn't come in until later. I My parents have always told me that I liked ball sports in general when I was younger. So I guess ball sports kind of came a little bit easier to me than maybe most kids. But it was actually my mom who played recreationally around the age of 9 or 10 for me. And she was playing in a local club in Amsterdam, and sometimes I would be at her hits or at her practices or something, and that's kind of where it all started. And then I picked up a racket there. From there, I was still playing soccer. I think about 6, 7 days a week, and I wanted to start playing tennis. So we signed up for a lesson once a week when I was 10, I think it was, something like that. And then that kind of quickly grew into something that I was improving at quite quickly. And, as a kid, if you're improving at something, you want to do it more. So one time a week became 3 times a week. And the way the school system works in the Netherlands is that when you're like 11 or 12, you go on to, or 12 or 13, I should say, you go on to what we call secondary education. So that's like our high school. And that's when I was playing tennis 3 times a week, but still soccer 6 times a week. And I had to kind of make a choice because the homework load was going to be a little bit too much. So I had some conversations with my parents and more so my dad, and he thought it was a better idea to keep going with tennis. So it was really the age of 12 that tennis became my main sport. And then 3 days a week became even more. And you started playing some, district tournaments or some local tournaments. And yeah, from there, things happened pretty quickly. When I was 14, this was in 2008, I think it was. I wanted to go on a summer camp for tennis. and my family wanted to go to the US on a vacation. So we decided to combine the two. And that's how I ended up 2 weeks at IMG at Bolletari's. And it was really at the end of those 2 weeks where I don't know exactly who this guy was or what his function was, but he was talking to my dad while I was having a practice there. And um, when we got back home in the Netherlands, my dad was like, well, the guy was talking to me because he wanted to invite you for a year to IMG. I guess they liked what they saw in those 2 weeks. But I'll leave it up to you. I'm not going to push you to do anything. And at that time, I had just finished 2 years of secondary school, and I wanted to transfer to a different school that was closer to where we were living. So I was like, I don't know what I need to do. I'm just starting a new school. I have to make new friends. So everything was kind of all up in the air. So in my mind, I was in between yes, no, yes, no. I want to go. I don't want to go. And it was really, I still remember this quite clearly. It was the last day that you could say yes to admissions, where my dad was in his office and he was like, I've drafted an email that says, thank you for the opportunity, but we're not going to take it. Sem is going to stay here. I'm going to leave the I'm going to leave the room for a couple minutes. You decide if you want to send it or not. But if I come back and the email is still on the screen, then you're going. So I just sat there as like a 14-year-old, like stressed, like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? But yeah, I never sent that email. So Dad said, okay, let's try it, and from there, I was in Florida in August and enrolled in school there. And yeah, what was only supposed to be a year turned out to be 3.5 years. So that was quite cool.
I,
That's
I
a
always love
beautiful story.
I always love hearing this story because I remember you told me this the last time we did it. I think one of the things I mean, there's a lot to unpack from what you just like said in and of itself, but the thing that I always like, which is something we've both talked about at length, right, is like at the end of the day, your parents left that decision to you, right? And like tennis is one of the sports that notoriously has involvement from parents, and sometimes it can be to your detriment, but in your case, right, like it really benefited you and that they left the decision to you to and were supportive of like that entire decision, right? Because at 14 years old, to make the decision to go train there for a year, it's not easy, right? Like you're moving different country, you're training by yourself, different environment. Like it's a tough one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it looking back, it doesn't feel that tough, but I'm sure that in those months where we had to make the decision and after we had to get everything in place, there was lots of crying and I'm going to miss you. And our little
Yeah,
baby is going overseas and stuff like
yeah.
that. But what I do remember vividly from the start at IMG was that you got into a program so quickly that you almost didn't have time to realize what actually was happening, but in a good way. You got dealt into a group of other 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds that came from all over the world, and you had your daily schedule. And I just remember we were doing fitness training and my mom had to leave back to Amsterdam. And I think I couldn't even find like 5 minutes to go say goodbye to her. So she just kind of was on the side, bawling her eyes out, saying bye to me. And then, yeah, you just get caught up in, the daily things with tennis, with fitness, with going to school. And I guess the language was a bit different, obviously, and also a bit difficult in the beginning. I do still remember opening up my laptop and having Google Translate as my homepage for a long time. But yeah, my parents were great and still are great in my tennis. They want to make sure I'm still loving what I'm doing, and they want to support however way they can. So I'm extremely grateful to them for sure.
That's awesome, man. And one question I think Pete said there's a lot to unpack, but rewinding all the way back to kind of that initial decision about tennis and soccer, could you give us a little more insight into how that decision was made, what that conversation with your dad was like, and whether or not there were some maybe initial regrets, after making that decision, or if it was just smooth sailing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I was playing a level of soccer that was kind of right below the youth academies for, the biggest teams in the Netherlands. So I guess I was always with people that were kind of advanced for their age in terms of soccer. So I realized I was also a year younger than most. So when most of my friends or most of my teammates went on to, the under 16s or the under 18s, whatever you want to call it, I was still stuck at that level just because of my age. But I think the biggest driver of it was the physicality of soccer when you got a little bit older. I think especially my dad started realizing that I maybe didn't have, the physicality at that age, or really the right mentality at that age to realize the physical demands, especially if I wanted to go into professional soccer. But every 14-year-old does. Um, so I don't think there was regret. I think there was definitely a moment of sadness, like, oh, wow, this was, 10 years of soccer that I'm now saying goodbye to. But it wasn't like I fell into a hole at that point, because I had tennis at which I was still improving. And when everything is new and shiny, I guess that transition makes it a little easier. There's been definitely years that you're like, oh, what if we kept going? Especially since some of my teammates that I played in that last year with went on to, play international professional soccer or made it to the highest league in the Netherlands. So there's obviously thoughts that go through your mind, as in, what if we kept playing? Would have I made the same level? But those are all what ifs. I'm at the end of the day, I'm extremely excited about the choice that we made. It gave me everything basically up until now. So I can't say I'm bitter or anything like that. I'm loving what I'm doing, and it's giving me some amazing friends, some amazing experiences. But I do still love soccer. When you
Yeah.
when you don't do something anymore, any chance that you get to play it, it's like you're a kid in the candy store. So
No, I was gonna say the other thing that's probably like the context here is like also, and in Netherlands, right? Like especially during that time, I mean, even now in general, soccer is king there, right? Like it's a much bigger deal there than it is in the States. And so especially for you to like decide I'm gonna choose the thing that's probably less popular in the Netherlands is very interesting decision. And at that point, I mean, you're 6'4" now, but like
yeah.
when you were 14 or 15, like I'm assuming you were still like you weren't that tall yet, right? Like you were still growing into your
No,
body. And
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. I was maybe taller than the average kid at that age, but it's
yeah,
not like I was this phenom, as in that I was
yeah,
tall and big, and all I needed to do was learn the skills. It was definitely literally growing pains. So yeah.
100%. Let's dive into the experience at IMG. I mean, like this is something we've talked about with other people as well. Like just the idea of going to like place far away and like making tennis almost like your full-time kind of occupation in a sense, because you're devoting so much time into it. I'm curious, like at that point, like was professional tennis even on your mind, or was it, hey, this is just a play, I like tennis, I think I'm like good, I'm just going to continue to get better here? Like what was your mindset in terms of like when you went to IMG and what you thought you were going to get out of the experience?
I had no idea what professional tennis was at that age. There was definitely no, I can't even call it an illusion or a dream or anything, because it wasn't even something that crossed my mind. Um, I wanted to go there just to play as much tennis as I could. I didn't have any aspirations or anything like that. I knew I also I wanted to go to school. I actually really enjoyed school as a kid. I was studious and enjoyed learning new things. Um, so the experience was more so just growing up at a much younger age than everybody else. It was really at that time where I got a taste of being around professionals. But it's not like I was, put in the group of guys that were supposed to be teenage professionals. I think I was like in the fourth tier group or something like that, especially in the beginning. But once you find your rhythm and coaches kind of start knowing what the kids are about and what the potential could be. I was thankfully able to, hit with Nishikori, who was there at that time. Sharapova came over a couple of times. Yuki Bamri was there. So there were guys that I could kind of look up to, but I also knew that was nowhere near where I was at that age. So I just wanted to do really well at school. I wanted to improve at tennis, and thankfully they saw the value in that. Because people kind of make fun of that place of, oh, there's either extremely rich kids that their parents go pay for, or you have to be this professional phenom that they invite there because they want to have the name early or something like that. And people forget there's actually quite a big middle group of kids that either got there on partial scholarship or people that add value without realizing they don't need to be a professional tennis player. There's a big element of being a stable kid in a place where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of kids from all over the world that have hormones going through their body in puberty and not having the responsibility of parents there. So I think it just made me grow up quickly and made me more independent than I probably would have been if I stayed at home.
You mentioned hormones at the end here. Were there any crazy stories that you have? I know having read Open, Andre Agassi talks a lot about, getting leaving the grounds and doing some fairly sketchy things. Did you have any stories like that?
Not me personally. I was too scared, man. I was always very cautious in that situation because I knew how much it meant to my parents and also to myself to be there. And what IMG actually did a really good job of is scaring it out of you. They made sure that you knew what the punishment was and that you knew what the consequences were if they were to catch you, I guess. But I also didn't really have any desire at that point to, break rules or do anything like that. I was really good through puberty. I was not really a rebel or anything like that. I was probably a little bit too cautious looking back now. I probably could have relaxed just a little bit more. And still, I never felt like I was missing out or not making friends because I was not doing those type of things. I was kind of happy with the circle that I had and the circle that kind of formed. And even now, there's still guys that keep in touch with each other, even a decade after, which I think is really cool. So that meant that the click was there without having to do what Andre Agassi did.
Right. And now on the flip side, I'll ask kind of the more narky question, but did IMG allow you to kind of flex the academic talent, and did they give you a space to really improve academically, or do you feel like that? I think the perception of a lot of people thinking that it's all just a bunch of jocks who don't do any online school, is that true? Which side did you fall on, or is it just what you make of it?
There's elements of all three. I feel like that's most high schools as well. It's there's obviously kind of people that are not interested in school and just want to do as much sports as you can. There's people that are really academic. What kind of confused me in the beginning about the school in the US is that at that age, 15, 16, 17, people from all kind of academic levels were all in the same class. They were all taking the same class if you're in the same grade. Where in the Netherlands, once you go from what we call elementary to our high school, you take this test, and based on that test score, you can apply to a certain level of high school. So the learning speed is kind of similar in your grade, if that makes sense. And then at IMG, it was kind of the flip side, where you have people that don't even know how to speak English that well, trying to learn the same subject that some international kids have already had in years prior. So it felt like it made it very difficult for teachers to kind of know at what pace they should keep the class at. But for me, like I said, I actually really enjoyed learning. So I got to take classes I really enjoyed. I think they saw the value of someone who wanted to improve both at tennis and academically. So I was lucky enough to also get some academic scholarship to IMG. And without a doubt, without IMG, I would have never known what college tennis was about or anything like that. That's not a thing back home. So I'm very grateful for that as well.
Talk to us a little bit about like what day-to-day life was like when you're at IMG. I mean, the picture you're basically painting is not dissimilar in terms of like what anyone in the US who plays a sport has to do, right? Like they're going to school, they're playing, they're training like a couple hours a day. Like it seems you had like a fairly balanced life in that sense. Like talk to us a little bit about what the routine was like.
Yeah. Yeah, it was there's a reason it's also called a college prep academy.
Yeah.
So the schedule there, now having gone through the college system, was kind of similar. You'd have, let's say, practice from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. And then some sort of fitness training 10 to 11, go shower, have some lunch. And then you could have school from like 12 to 5, or sometimes from like 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, kind of all depend on what day it was and what grade you were in. And then there were also optional kind of fitness classes or emotional classes that you could take, some mental training. Those were all provided there, obviously at a cost. And then you basically had homework. We didn't have any like study hall or anything like that was mandatory. But the cafeteria was open at certain hours, so you had to make sure you went to go eat at the right hours and stuff like that. There was definitely a curfew, especially if you were under 16. That was probably the most stringent time. You had to make sure you were in your room at a certain time, and then the dorm mentors, as we would call them, they would make their rounds and make sure that everybody's in the right place. And then it was literally lights out by a certain time. Once you turn 16, you get a little bit more privileges, as they start preparing you for like, okay, you have to gonna lead an independent life. And I was never 18 when I was at IMG, but I heard if you're 18 and over, then it's basically like it's all up to you what you want to do. So yeah, it was, one part of the day was your sport, and again, it wasn't just tennis. IMG was golf, was baseball, was basketball. They didn't have American football when I was there yet. I've heard, I haven't been back since, that it's changed dramatically. But so you were basically in class with a whole bunch of different sports. So you weren't necessarily always with the people in your tennis group or everybody that was there for tennis, which I really liked.
Okay, so we're getting probably titillatingly close to talking about college here. But one more question from me on the IMG experience was, we noticed that when looking at your TR, it showed that you actually trended down between freshman and senior year. I think it showed like 212 in freshman year in the US, and then 316 by senior year. Was this just a function of you playing international tournaments and not having an accurate ranking, or do you feel like a lot of the improvement that you made happened in college?
Definitely the last part. I would say some of the foundation was laid at IMG. And I think we used that foundation to accelerate my learning in college. Now looking back, what I think I learned at IMG was more so the stuff around tennis that makes a successful system rather than pure tennis skill. And what is tough also in IMG is you have however many different coaches trying to coach the same strategy, but everybody has a different language or a different viewpoint on what you should do with a certain shot or how a certain shot should be hit. Compare that to college, where you have a head coach and an assistant coach and maybe a volunteer, where it's much more personal, if that makes sense. So, and again, I wasn't in any sort of position to realize that I needed a certain tennis ranking to get to a certain college or anything like that, or I never really had any junior experience. It wasn't until my second to last year at IMG where I started going to some tournaments, played some ITF juniors. I think I maybe got 1 point or something like that. I don't actually quite remember. but again, that wasn't really in the cards for me at that point. It's not like I felt like, oh, I need to get my ranking up because then I'm going to get good offers, or then I can see what pro tennis is like. It was really, no, like, I'm doing well, I'm improving. I was able to move up in groups at IMG. My schoolwork was good. And then when I was 17, I actually had hip surgery at that age. So I graduated a year early, and I was able to take that gap year to rehab from the hip surgery. And I think at that point, it kind of also became clear that I wanted to go to college in the US because I wanted to keep playing tennis and I wanted to go to school. And I think that was a function of me not having any dreams or any sort of aspirations to go into professional tennis at that point.
Yeah, this is so fascinating because I was kind of observing your reaction when I mentioned your ranking, and it just seems like that kind of stuff, you don't really have a photographic memory like other people about all their, wins and losses and points that they've had. And it just seems like you're so kind of intrinsically motivated. Has it always been that way, or do you think this is just a function of you kind of just going through the motions and following the path that, you think you set out for yourself?
Maybe a combination of both. I think my parents actually did a really good job, going back to your guys' point earlier, to giving us kind of autonomy over our choices. Because I think that allowed us to, I have a sister, so when I say us, it's me and my sister. It allowed us to pursue avenues that we wanted to pursue. Um, I do realize now that, I've been gifted with a brain that can handle a lot of workload, and enjoys thinking about things. So that kind of made it easier for me to realize that, these guys that are playing, instead of 3 hours a day like I was, they were practicing 6, 7 hours a day, which doesn't mean it's any better, but they just had their dream of, I'm doing this, I'm going to go professional tennis. And maybe also because they were pushed by their parents or because they saw someone on TV. But what I really enjoyed was just getting better. And I think that right now that is actually a skill that a lot of people should develop. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but it's something that I think has helped me a lot. So I think that intrinsic motivation was always kind of there. And I think it also comes back to wanting to make sure I got the full value out of what my parents were able to give me at that point in time.
I mean, and this is something we talk about a lot, right? Like process over results. It sounds so cliche at this point, but it's especially when we're kids and like focusing on that, right? Like it's not told necessarily, or at least it wasn't to me or any of the people I talked to. It was always like, oh, we have to get to this ranking or something, right? And it was never, oh, let's focus on how we can continue to get better each day. And one of the things I wanted to talk about is like, what was the coaching philosophy at IMG in terms of how did you get like the 3 hours that you guys practiced in the morning, right? Like what was actually happening in terms of what to do in order to get better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what they did do well is before the start of every semester, they had all of the groups go through kind of a checklist with their coach, that kind of said, okay, this is what we need to work on. This is how we want to accomplish it. And then I'm not sure if everybody got to do this, but I guess up to a certain point, the groups got to go to Nick himself, Nick Bollettieri, where, he was the man behind the whole
The
academy.
guy.
Yeah. Everybody from his coaching staff really respected him. So we got to go to his indoor court where we would hit for whatever it be, 30, 45 minutes while he was watching. And then he would watch with the coach of that group and say, this is what he needs to work on. Let's do it like this. They would take quick notes, and then at least they knew what that kid was going to have to work on for the next few months. Your group coach doesn't necessarily have to be, at least this was my case, it didn't have to be the coach that you also could take individuals with. So you could have an individual coach that you did private lessons with outside of the group hours. But again, it was really more of like a mentality that was instilled rather than everybody was trying to hit the same forehand or make the same kind of contact on their serve or anything like that. So yeah, it wasn't really any sort of big thing that they instilled in me, then this is going to be your weapon or anything like that. It became pretty clear going back now to your physicality point that I also needed to get stronger as a tennis player. So that's where IMG was really the first time where I legitimately started doing strength training and started actually doing stuff with weights. And I'm very happy that I started at that age because I think it helps a lot even for kids.
Yeah, especially given how physical, how like tennis has continued to get more physical, right? I think one final point before we transition into some other stuff. I know you were saying back then, like you never thought about professional tennis, right, as the path, but looking back, if you had known like this is what you wanted to do, would you have changed anything in terms of how you train or what you would have done in order to help you get there? Like, do you think you could have accelerated it even further? That you could have accelerated your development even further than you did?
No, because I needed to go to college.
Okay,
I was not ready
interesting.
for the professional tour. There's no way.
Yeah,
I just wasn't ready as a person.
yeah,
And I think I would have been in a position, let's say I had the skills, like the actual level to go professional when I was that
yeah,
young. There's a guy here, Alex Mickelson in the tournament.
yeah,
He's 18. I mean, he's clearly good enough to be at this level. And if I look at him and I compare myself at that age, it's two different realities. But hypothetically, for your point, let's say I had the skills, I wouldn't have had the maturity to really know what it all takes. And I think I would have been in a position where a lot of people could take advantage of me. I think it's also kind of in my nature to be a little bit liked by everybody, almost wanting to please everybody, which is something that I learned through college and after, and not at IMG. So I just think I would have been too soft at that point. And if that's the case, if you feel like in your personality, it's not a good idea to pursue that path, then it doesn't matter what training you do with tennis or with weights. It's just not going to be a good time.
Mm. And last but not least, rest in peace, Nick, who I think, his death anniversary is coming up in a year, um, or in a few days, really. Uh, do you remember anything specific that he told you? He's kind of an elusive figure to people who didn't go to IMG. Could you tell us a little bit more about him and, how much of an influence he had on the game?
Yeah, I mean the second question is tough because he predates me by many decades. So I've heard, and again this is from a very limited perspective that I had with him, that he wasn't always the nicest. But then again, you have to ask yourself, can you really build an academy like that if you're the nicest person in the world? So I think he's meant a tremendous amount for tennis, just given by the fact that if you ask any tennis fan or any tennis player, do you know Nick Bollettieri? They're probably going to say yes. So to build that kind of a reputation and that kind of name for yourself, I think is an achievement in and of itself. I never really had any private lessons with him or anything like that. So it's not like I got a lot of coaching from him. And it's also tough for him because he has an academy where hundreds, maybe close to 1,000 kids come to train. So he's not going to know everybody personally. He really only works with the people that either want to pay for his private lessons or the people that are in the top group and are gonna try to make it professionally at a young age. So I did get some exposure to him, like I said, at the beginning of every semester there. And then he would always had this one spot right by his indoor court where he would just tan for like 8 hours a day. He would just sit outside in his chair, just slowly kind of turning into the leather man is what we called him. So I got to strike up a few conversations with him at that point. But I felt like there was kind of a disconnect between our realities because he would always talk about the professional game and make sure you do this. And I was on my way to school or something to take a biology test. um, so I do remember, kind of being around him, but I wouldn't say I was very close to him or anything like that.
And I mean, at that point, especially, right? Like his world is so different in that by the time you were at IMG, he had already coached Agassi, he had already coached Courier, like he had already coached the guys like legends of our sport, right? And so his vision is so different from a lot of us. I think transitioning over into like one of the other important decisions that you've had to make, like talk to us a little bit about your college selection process and how you ended up going to UOP.
Yeah. So I was actually kind of going into the college transition period before I had my hip surgery. So I didn't really know exactly what college tennis was all about. Um, I knew people started talking about it when they were, sophomore, junior, seniors. And that's when also kind of the mission counselor at IMG started asking questions of, hey, do you know what you want to do when you graduate? Do you want to keep playing? Are you going back home? So that's when kind of also the conversations between me and my parents started. And through those conversations and just through my experience at IMG became clear that I wanted to keep studying, but I also wanted to keep playing. So the decision to then go for college tennis was a pretty good one. And, when I graduated, I started visiting some schools with my dad over in the US. So he came over and we made a couple of trips on the East Coast and on the West Coast. And my college counselor, shout out Gretchen, she was amazing. Um, she realized that it was going to be more about academics than it was about tennis. I was looking at D3 schools, I was looking at D1 schools. So it was really the overarching question was, what do I want to study? And let's see if they have the major that I want to study. And then secondary to that, we looked at, okay, what does their team look like? Everybody has Stanford and Harvard and stuff like that on their radar, but it's like, okay, good luck. So when I graduated early, I was actually very close to going to Boston University. I met with the coach there. I went on an official team visit, and I was very close to actually signing the papers. And then when my hip surgery happened, or when my hip injury happened, the university pulled their commitment. And then when I consciously made the choice of, okay, if I want to keep playing, I have to have this surgery, then we kind of started the process all over again, still with the question, what do I want to study? But that answer to that question changed throughout my rehab. It became clear that I also had a passion for medicine, and in particular sports medicine, where the doctors and the physios that helped me get back to a playing level, I had such a gratitude towards them that I just had it in my mind. I want to do what you guys did. So we started looking at majors from there, and then just sending a whole bunch of emails and seeing which schools replied. And thankfully, University of the Pacific was one of them that replied. And my dad and I went there and struck up a conversation with the coach and watched the practice. And he was really the only one that, I guess, saw something of value when we were there. And he called my coach at IMG to talk about, what kind of person I was and what kind of character and how my tennis was. And he was really the only one from the universities where I had the, I guess, academic prowess to go to. They had the major that I wanted to study. And I'm not sure if this is his exact words anymore, but I think he said something like, oh yeah, we can always use a tall lefty for like number 3 doubles or something like that. So yeah, I actually started at UOP as a walk-on, which is quite funny.
Man, I'm just trying to imagine if you had elected to go D3, what you'd have done with your lefty serve to the CMU tennis team. I think it would have been absolute disaster. But I think we've brushed over this topic one too many times. I do want to double click on that injury that you had.
Yeah.
How did it happen? How did you rehab? do you have any advice for people who are going through kind of a similar situation? Because I have discovered midway through my college career that I have partially torn labrum in both hips from tennis. So similar to what Murray has, if I had played another 10 years competitively, probably I would have had to replace the hip because the head of the femur develops lumps and kind of tears the labrum as it moves around. So just very curious on that topic.
That's exactly what happened to me. I tore my labrum in my right hip, and I think it was a combination of probably overuse and some wrong move on the tennis court. It happened at IMG, and I think maybe it was somewhere in the spring because it was all about college commitments and getting close to graduation. So I remember it was somewhere in the spring, and after that, they have a whole rehab program at IMG that just comes with the experience there. But I remember they thought it was just like a muscle strain or something like that. So we actually did quite a lot of rehab for the muscles around my hip, and it never actually got better. And at one point they started saying that it might be a bit scary for you to come back, but you're fully healed, all your muscles are doing well and stuff like that. But there was still pain, and I still couldn't quite perform at the level that I wanted to. So then I graduated and I went home, and the pain was still there. So eventually, I don't remember exactly how we got to this, but we decided to do a contrast MRI where they put a little dark fluid while they do the MRI, and then it became abundantly clear that something in my labrum was torn. And at that point, he said, we can surgically repair this with an arthroscopy. So I think it was in July that I had the surgery. 3 small incisions that I still have, and he did an amazing job. The doctor, this was in Amsterdam. He did a fantastic job. I've really never had any problems since then. But I did most of the rehab back at home in Amsterdam. So that was from like August to, I think it was towards the end of the year. So I came back to IMG the following spring in January, also to go through the college admission process again and go through that whole situation. But yeah, any advice? I mean, it's tough. Every body is unique. Every mentality is going to be unique. I was actually very lucky that my dad was very persistent on this topic, to where he says, he believed that I wasn't just making it up, that the pain had to come from somewhere. So he was really the one that asked his friends who were doctors about what do we need to do, and what can we do, and who can we talk to, and stuff like that. So it was really in January where I started playing tennis. So I went back to IMG for those 6 months. And then again, since then, it hasn't bothered me anymore. I'm going to knock on wood, but yeah. So since then, it's been quite good.
Yeah, so I don't want to derail the conversation, but we'll have to talk offline about this because I actually saw the 49ers surgeon for my
Okay.
situation, and the way he described the surgery was I'm not sure if it was the same as you, but he basically would go in, shave the head of the femur to make it more spherical and fit back in the labrum better, and then like attach some type of synthetic rubber band to replace the labrum. And the way he described it was that 80% of people will basically feel the same, or maybe be a little bit better. And I was just very unconvinced by his statistic, and I opted to not do the surgery. But you're making me potentially regret that decision because I've never since really regained mobility in the hips. So but it sounds like your surgery went really, really well.
Yeah, and it's been a while. It's been like 12 years. So maybe my situation wasn't exactly like what yours are, but I do vividly remember it was a torn labrum. I might still have the MRI images somewhere. But yeah, happy to talk offline about it for sure.
I was gonna say the one thing that's kind of related to this that I mean, Sem, you mentioned like a long time ago is like you were talking about how your injury was as a cause of overuse, right? And like one of the things you were saying was that yeah, I remember you were talking to one of the physios or someone on the ATP tour, and they were basically saying like they thought Andy's hip would the same thing would happen to Andy's hip because biomechanically, like the way he hits his forehand or hits his forehand, hits his backhand, all of that contributes to how he moves and how he's hitting, right? And like I mean, obviously he's been very healthy now, which is great, but you can see like it's a little stiff. It's hard, right? Because of how much he's playing, and it's insane to me. I always found it very like fascinating that even at that level, like the ATP like physios and stuff, they could recognize it, right? And there's no knowledge around how to kind of like rectify that at a young age, right? Because these are habits that are built in from so early on.
Yeah, and it's just also a cautious reminder to, academies and coaches and everybody involved with young kids to make sure that they're going to be okay 10, 15, 20 years after their teenage years. It's very easy to start thinking my kid is amazing at tennis when he was 16, so he needs to practice 7, 8 hours a day. And some kids really do love that. Some kids will not say no, and some kids may reluctantly do it. But 16 is still very, very, very young. So if you are in a situation where you're elite as a tennis player, or if you're the parents or a coach of an elite tennis player, I think it's our responsibility to safeguard them and make them realize that they still have, if they're actually going to go pro, they have now 10, 20 years of a career if they do it right. So whatever happens at 16, however many hours you train there, is not going to perfectly correlate with where you're going to be when you're 25, or especially when you're 30. So just be careful.
And it's something we've talked about a lot, right? Like of guys who play a lot at a very early age. There's looking back, like one of the things we've talked about is like there's a lot you can fit in like an hour and a half, right? Very, very focused. I mean, a lot of the stuff nowadays, or like in the past, right? A lot of ground strokes, a lot of stuff, not that much emphasis on the serve, the returns, the volleys, and especially in doubles, right? Like key elements, and very little, if any, like mental training, right? And those are all aspects that almost make like the biggest difference in tennis overall. I want to like touch real quick on your college career at Pacific. I know we've talked about how much you've improved, but talk to us a little bit about your freshman year, because even though you were a walk on, you still started and played a lot your freshman year. So
Yep.
how was that experience?
I am extremely fortunate with the situation that I got into at Pacific. I've since then heard also other Dutch players or just other international players that didn't even come close to the experience that I had. I was pretty naive to think that college is great because you're just gonna have what I have for 4 years. But that perspective has now changed a bit. But yeah, I mean, I came in again similar to actually to IMG without really any expectations. I wasn't brought on as being the number one guy, or this guy is supposed to be top 50 in college, or anything like that. I think what Coach Redondo liked the most was just my focus on having improved, my focus on the academics as well. He knew that he was probably going to get like just a well-rounded person and an athlete, and someone who was coachable. So the beginning, I think, was actually very tough. There was a guy that was at IMG that also went to that school. So in the beginning, I was very shy. I was always kind of hanging around him and always just only wanted to practice with him and another walk on, because I never really saw myself as being a part of the team. These guys were always, guys were on scholarship, and these guys were brought in with a little bit more fanfare than I was. So I really had to come out of my shell, especially the first semester, to even feel like I could practice with the guys that were supposed to be in the lineup. And Coach Redondo was actually quite hard on me for that in the first few months, because I think he saw something that I couldn't quite see or feel yet. But those expectations that I didn't have also gave us a clean slate to start with. And I bought into what Coach Redondo was saying and was trying to teach very early on. So through his system, I started improving quite a lot pretty fast. So, the tournaments that I went to, I actually probably did better than what anybody expected. My game was developing. And once I actually started practicing with the guys that were in the lineup, he started seeing that, okay, well, maybe he's not just a number 3 doubles player. Maybe he can actually also start for us. And I think by the time the season started, he told me, okay, like, you're going to start. You've done your part. And I was just happy that I could be on the team. I was having a great time, and I was doing what I love doing. So I think I started at 4 in the lineup, and I will never forget this moment. The first match was against LMU in our conference, and the historic clinch, as they call it in college, happened my very first match. I ended up being the guy at 3-all to clinch the match at 4-3. So I experienced something in my very first match that not a lot of people get to experience in their 4 years. And I think it actually happened that in that first year, I actually clinched like 5 or 6 times or something like that, which, is maybe a testament to my slow game at that point. But yeah, I kind of transitioned starting at 4 and kind of steadily moved up through the lineup. Never really had any expectations on myself saying, oh, now you're 4, you're going to have to be number 1 by the end of your semester or something like that. I wanted to play wherever Coach Redondo played me. And, I realized pretty quickly that there was going to be value at every single point, and it didn't really matter at what part of the lineup that was. So I had a fantastic freshman year. My major was exactly what I wanted. The team was great, and extremely lucky with the coach. So it was kind of a perfect storm of all paradise.
Yeah, you and I both know that lefty slider out wide on the ad court at 3-all against LMU is working wonders. I've seen it in action. This is like really interesting because a lot of, I mean, especially transitioning from IMG to D1, right? Like it's almost, to an extent, it's almost like the IMG like point of we need like if you put a bunch of people in an environment, like you're bound to get better, right? And so I'm sure at Pacific, especially for you, like having all those people around you like only improved your game like significantly, right? And so I'm curious, like moving after your freshman year, when you went into your like sophomore and subsequent years, did coach tell you were going to play 1, or by then did you already know or realize that I'm one of the better players on the team because I've already like had such a good freshman year and I've been able to play 1 at times?
Yeah, I never really had any, let's say, reasons for myself to say I've started at 1, so I need to be 1. It became evident over my freshman year that I was one of the leaders, in a sense that I could sense that I could kind of hold the responsibilities of a captain without really enforcing myself, which some members of the team didn't really take kindly to a freshman, I guess, getting named captain. But at one point you start realizing that if you do the things that we did in school and you do them consistently, they're gonna work. They're at least gonna work for me. And I never felt like, oh, I'm the best player on the team or I should be playing number 1, but it was just more so I think I can do the things that Coach Redondo wants us to do just a bit better right now than people, the rest of the team. And so yeah, those kind of reasons or those kind of facts just made it that I started my sophomore year, I think at 1, but I knew there were other people coming up, and I never really had this view of myself like, oh, I have to fend off the guys that want to play at 1. So I think that was a perfect balance between, look, you're getting the results, so you deserve to be at number one or number two, but at the same time, those results are coming just because you keep focusing on improving. So same kind of mindset freshman and sophomore year, except that now I realized I was actually a part of the team and not and not a walk on.
I know Coach Redondo. I've heard through the grapevine that Coach Redondo is famous for his mental like approach, especially on the team. I'm curious about the types of strategies and stuff that he asked or he demanded of the team in terms of like a mental preparation, because I imagine those are super beneficial for you as someone who is like disciplined and focused on the things that they have to do in order to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was also a benefit for me because I was never one of the most talented guys. I never had this, like you called it, lefty slider. I really had to work very hard to get that to a level where it's at now, and also in college. And there's still much more room to improve. But so I always needed the kind of the rails, the box that I really liked so much, where I could kind of find the discipline. And discipline was really a big word for us at Pacific. It meant a lot of things, not just, you know, time management and doing your school, but it was really just a overarching system in which we conducted ourselves. And you know, some guys bought in more than others, and those kind of gravitated more towards the top of the lineup, and those that didn't sometimes fell a little bit behind. But yeah, he focused a lot on also just developing as a person and not so much as a tennis player. So we did a lot of visualization. We did a lot of meditations as well, a lot of journaling, and I think just making sure to use the time off the court to also produce results on court. One of the things that I still do that he taught me was using the time, especially in between points. He was very big on that, making sure that you have a routine of language or a routine of physical things that you do just to make sure that you reset before every point. And I'm forgetting tons of it just because there's so much valuable information that he taught me. And again, his system was perfect for my situation. And I realize now that, you know, talking to ex-teammates now or talking to guys that went through college, that's not always the case. And you know, after that, Coach Redondo did a lot of good things in San Diego. So I actually got to play his San Diego event twice, through which we still connected. And so I'll think I'll kind of be a student of his system and his mental game forever. I still wear two wristbands that I have from, you know, my time at Pacific, and I look at them quite a lot. So yeah, I was really happy with his focus on life and just being good people, because he was big on the mentality of if you're good as a person, then it's much easier to be a good tennis player as well. And I really connected to that.
And do you think this philosophy was the core reason why you kind of had a meteoric jump between your junior and senior year as well, or were there other tweaks and changes that you made as well?
There were two big things that happened between junior and senior year. My junior year sucked. It was it was awful. I was sick for a long time. I had mono in my junior year. So, you know, especially throughout the spring season, I could play doubles well. I think my doubles record my junior year was actually quite good. I was playing with another Dutch guy, and we were actually getting some very good wins. But then I'll get into singles, and by then the actual disease of the mono had been out of my system. But I still felt like I'm so tired, and you know, things just come so much more difficult, and the things that kind of came easy to me because I worked so hard on it the past 2 years now felt so laborious. And I was like, what the hell? How come nothing is working? And I was getting a lot more emotional, and not just frustrated, but also just really on the verge of crying. And just it was much harder to control where I was with my presence. So I actually set out quite a lot of my junior year after singles, and I came back towards the end of the semester. And then going into my senior year, the big realization was, well, look, this is going to be my last year of playing tennis if I'm not going to go try and play professionally after that. And that hit me like a brick. It kind of shook my whole world at that point. And that's when we started having conversations with the coach and the assistant coach of, you know, let's make this year the best we've ever had. But also, do you think it might be worth it trying to play afterwards? And, by then I had gotten some results against guys that were getting results in futures. And it became a little bit more realistic for me to at least see the path to the futures. I wouldn't say path to professional tennis or whatever, but it felt more and more like I can compete at an international level. And once we decided I'm gonna keep playing, I think that freed me up in a big way. I think everything just kind of settled, and I said that the pressure that a lot of seniors feel of like, oh my God, this is my last year. I have to do everything that I wanted to do. Just kind of slid right off me because I knew I was setting myself up for a few more years of tennis after that. So I just kind of became even more of a sponge that last year and soaked up everything that I could. Had a lot more conversations with Coach Redondo off the court. It was actually quite ironic because during the season he rarely said anything to me on the court because I was just doing what I needed to do. We both felt this level of trust where it's just like, I know what he's going to say, I know what he expects of me, and Coach Redondo just always felt like he's going to do what I expect of him, and that was a great feeling that we had there. And it's not like it all went automatically that year. I realized the results may make it feel like everything happened without having to do the work, but it was really a different mentality that we applied to the work. Everything just had a kind of a deeper meaning because I wanted to learn as much as I could before I went out on my own after my senior year.
It's one of those things, right? Like where you keep stacking days on top of each other, right? And like slowly and surely, like the work will continue to like show itself, right? It's not going to come overnight. And honestly, talking like when just looking back at this, your development almost came kind of like a little later than most people, right? In the sense that your senior year was your best year ever, and that's what gave you the confidence to basically say like, okay, I'm capable of playing like at an international level. Honestly, just moving into that, I'm curious what like the first year post Pacific was like playing on the tour and where your mindset was at. How'd you deal with it? What were the conversations with your parents like in terms of how you're going to do it? Like, what were your goals at that point?
Yeah, so we as in my parents and I, we found the college system very valuable, and we also liked the 4 year transition from freshman to senior. And I think that really spoke to me because I went through it, but also to my parents because they could see that transition not just as a tennis player, but also just as a human being, like a young adult. They could see things when I came back home or just on our Skype or FaceTime calls, like, oh wow, this guy is actually growing. This guy's actually growing up. So based on that, we made a 4 year plan for after college, and that was one of the big things that I learned before I even started playing is that a lot of players say, oh, I'm going to give it maybe 1 year or maybe even a bit less and see where I'm at. And if I'm not where I want to be, then I'll go do something else. And I was lucky to have people around me that said, look, if you're going to do this, you're going to need to do it for multiple years. A year goes by in an absolute instant. So we made a 4 year plan. We made a whole presentation and kind of with milestones along the way and with the system that we wanted to use, who was going to be the coach, where was I going to train, where was I going to base out of and stuff like that. So the first year I actually I did a lot of my training from California still. I was very lucky to have a family that would let me stay with them. Basically, I became a third son to them, as they put it. So lots of love to the Soderstrom family if they ever get to listen to this. Thank you so much for all those years. But so I based out of Pacific because going out to the futures at that time, it became clear that a college situation is actually very professional. You know, you have the courts, you have the gym, you have the rehab facilities. And once you get out into that jungle, that's the futures, you realize, oh wow, that's that's actually a big privilege. Um, so yeah, I did the was it in 2016 that Stockton had a challenger? I think it was right after I graduated where Stockton organized a challenger, and yeah, luckily enough, I got a wild card in singles and doubles there. Singles didn't go so well, so let's not talk about that. No. But we actually had two great wins in doubles that tournament, and that was, you know, my kind of step into the futures because you have a ranking at that point. I think I jumped from having no ranking to maybe being like 900 or 950 on the rankings, which obviously is a lot faster than if you get to do that through futures. So it was really my doubles ranking that allowed me to actually get into the futures that I wanted to get into. I think what a lot of players don't realize when they start out is that it's a jungle in the beginning. You know, if you don't have a point, you're gonna have to play 2-3 rounds of qualies at every event that you play, and you might win all 3 rounds and then lose first round and not get a point, which is brutal. You know, because you're playing people your level and you feel like you're not getting rewarded for it. So yeah, I was lucky. I started actually traveling towards I think it was December 2016 was my first future, and then 2017 was my first full year on tour. And the doubles actually went quite quickly. I found kind of success on the futures tour early with guys that I knew from college. You know, I was with John Lamble, I was with Bernardo Saraiva, all guys that played even in our conference. So that made the connection even a bit better. Yeah, and then slowly started building my singles ranking up as well. And yeah, everybody at that point, at least when I was playing, everybody was like, you have to make it as a singles player, and then doubles is kind of on the side. So yeah, I got to travel to the luxurious places in Egypt and stuff like that, and it's very important that first year, now looking back, to make sure that you find the people with the same mentality. It's very easy to get in touch with people that have been in futures for a while, and feel like the whole world is against them. And those are the people that you want to avoid, especially when you're on the road for 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row, whatever block you're doing. But again, I was lucky to have those college people around me that also wanted to play doubles, and the doubles went well. So when you're winning, I think it makes it a little easier for sure. But yeah, I look back very fondly on that first year.
I mean, it's funny, right? Like when you, especially on the point of like surrounding yourself with people who have, you know, those similar like ambition. It makes, especially when you're traveling to Egypt, you're traveling to like all sorts of places, like not just in the US, like across the world, right? It's extremely difficult to be able to like deal with that type of day to day or like the professional life in general, right? And I'm curious, like, what was the hardest part about like your transition from futures to mainly playing on the challengers? Because as we know, right, like futures like now I feel, do you think it's fair to say like future is the best, like because you've played in college, right? Like it's a comparable level because there's like a lot of good college players that play in futures events. But what was the transition from futures to challengers like?
Yeah, it was in 2018 in May. I was doing a trial with my coach that I still work with now, Jacob Meyer. And throughout our talks, he made it quite clear that the best thing to do was use your doubles to get into the Challenger Tour and then build your level of just an overall tennis player to be good enough to win matches at that level. I still at that point had the vision of like, oh, I need to go back to futures to work on my singles ranking, and I'll just keep winning futures doubles. I think at one point, and this is not to brag or anything, but I think I was winning like 50% of the futures that I was playing in. So he was like, look, your double skills are good enough right now to start competing on the Challenger Tour. So let's use that, just because the mentality at the Challenger Tour and also just the facilities is a lot different than on the Futures Tour. And obviously there was a little bit of pushback for me in the beginning because I wouldn't be playing singles as much, and I wasn't doing, I think, the traditional way. But yeah, at one point, I think the Challenger results started coming in, and it was really in towards the end of 2018 where I predominantly started playing Challengers. And then it wasn't really that difficult for me to say, let's focus on doubles, like you said, to get us into those kind of environments, and then working our way up to that. And then, I think I made a similar jump through the wildcard situation in Stockton from futures to challengers, to when I played in Basel with my friend Marc-Andrea Hussler in that 500, and we won around there. That gave us 90 points to make a jump from somewhere in the 200s to low in the hundreds. So that set me up also for the next year to play more challengers more consistently. And yeah, at that point, I think there isn't a whole lot of difference, or there wasn't a whole lot of difference between the top of the futures doubles to challenger doubles. And it was also around that time that they started making those changes to the rankings. So you had the ATP ranking and the ITF ranking. And you could see that the guys that had a high ITF ranking were also going to find success in the challengers. So it wasn't really that much of a level transition, but it was 100% a mentality transition for me to start competing on the Challenger Tour. And what I mean by that, it was more so accepting that this was going to be my way into professional tennis, and also going back to how I felt my freshman year in college. I was saying like, look, I belong here with these guys. I've had the results to show it, and really getting more comfortable being around people that I never really had any intention to be around, because I couldn't see that throughout my years in IMG and in college. So that was a big difference.
Curious about what you think would have been able to help accelerate that. Like I know it takes time for everyone, but I'm curious, like, do you feel that any of the process could have been accelerated for you in reaching like the challengers level earlier than even like you did?
It's a good question. I mean, with the knowledge that I have now, a lot of it for me was going to be the emotional and the mental work, because I knew that I was always going to do the stuff that I needed to get better at tennis. But it was more so just being comfortable with myself and knowing what kind of level I had at that point, and knowing that me playing that level was going to be the best for that team that I was playing in the challenges with. I think especially in the beginning, and I still have this challenge to this day, I think probably to a lesser extent, but at that point when I was training with guys that I thought were just so much better than me for so long, I think I kind of made myself a little bit smaller and more timid than what was healthy or what was needed. And especially when I was playing with a guy on the doubles court that I thought, oh my God, he's so good, I would just kind of make everything about him. What does he need and how does he play his best? And not necessarily about what can I bring to the table to make this team win. And the difference there between practice and matches were quite big in the beginning, where I was doing things in practice that felt very scary in the matches. also because I didn't want to let my partner down, or I didn't want to, make a fool of myself in front of the opponents or anything like that. So I think getting more comfortable with myself faster probably would have made a big difference in the beginning. But that's all in hindsight, and this is always going to be an ongoing process for me. And, things will still get unlocked. But that was probably a big difference maker in the beginning, if I could go and change something.
One thing we've noticed with a lot of the doubles matches is that most of them end up in a third set breaker. Do you think that this mentality was a contributor to you flipping the script on a lot of those matches? Or, and also just related to that, how do you kind of maintain your emotions when you're going through these roller coaster of tournaments where it's three setter here, three setter there? How do you kind of keep your cool and handle all those emotions?
Yeah, again, this is a lesson that everybody's going through at all ages and all stages. It's not something that you learn and then it's set. It's something that's continuous and always ongoing. But I think that's where, for me, a lot of the foundation was laid already in college. With a lot of the mental training that we had there, a lot of the emotional training that we had there. It seems now, looking back, that I was probably at a maturity level for my age that not a lot of people would have. And I was very grateful to everybody who's gotten me to that stage, for sure. So yeah, it's just going back to tactics. I think one of my strengths right now is scouting opponents before we play them. So I think having that with me and having that knowledge, I think, gave me a sense of calmness as well, because I could always fall back onto the discipline of, okay, look, this is what we saw previously, so let's make sure we go back to, we know what we have to do. But going back to what you said about flipping the script, I think people think 10-point tiebreakers are more of a roller coaster than they actually might be in real life. It's my opinion that compared to a third set, yes, absolutely, there's going to be more chance and more randomness in a 10-point tiebreaker. And still, I think the better team is going to come out on top more often than what people realize. People call it a lottery or something like that, but it's really going to come down to your discipline at that point. And that's something that I've always been able to fall back on. And thankfully, that's something I can sometimes instill my partner. Sometimes I can't. And sometimes, opponents just play too good. Sometimes you just gotta tip your cap and say, okay, look, we tried everything, but they came up with what they needed to do. And I think that just provided me with a bigger sense of calm. It'll be interesting, actually, for me to look at what my 10-point tiebreak record is. That's something that maybe I'm going to start making a project of, because I'm not sure if it's excellent or if it's abysmal or if I'm somewhere in the average. I actually really don't know.
I mean, I was legit gonna say, like, one. I mean, the quote that we have in the chat, "Discipline equals freedom." I was literally gonna reference that, right? Like, the more once you have that framework for how you approach a problem, right? Like, almost every point in the tiebreaker, basically, or in a 10-pointer, like, remains kind of the same, right? If you're able to do it. Obviously, significantly easier said than done to be able to
Yeah.
focus on that, but why go for the 130 down the tee when you can go for the 110 out wide on the ad side? You know what I mean? So
Yeah. Yeah. And again,
100%.
it's always going to come back to what you set your intentions towards as well. In the beginning, and all of the things that I say in the beginning are still here for me, but just in a much lesser intensity. And I'm still doing the work to get through this. But in the beginning, I think I was much more hoping for a mistake from my opponents, or for them to get more nervous than I did, so that I didn't have to go out of my comfort zone or anything like that. Again, I still think there's a lot less randomness than what people realize. And the way I handled that randomness was before the match. That was by saying, this is how I think we should beat these guys. This is how I think we should play. So in the 10-point tiebreaker, let's set our intentions. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But that for me was a big difference maker, to where people, said, "Oh, it seems like you're always so disciplined," or something like that. Well, in my mind, I'm like, "Oh, what's going on? I'm nervous."
100%. I think one of the things that obviously we've been fortunate to watch a lot more, like doubles in general and doubles even on the Challenger Tour, it's at an extremely high level. And I'm curious from your standpoint, like, how do you evaluate tactics that you think are like, what are some of the general tactics that you think are effective at this level? Obviously, it's dependent on the matchup, but we've observed a lot over the past like couple of weeks, and like obviously much longer, and we're kind of curious to hear your thoughts on specific patterns or tactics that you generally think are effective.
Yeah, one great resource that we had in college was called Brain Game Tennis, where I think it was Craig O'Shaughnessy that did that, and he made the 25 golden rules for singles and also for doubles. And including me, we made some fun of it in college, like, oh, we have to have more homework and stuff like that. But if you look back at it now, his rules are actually quite good. So there are some universal truths. A lot of them are just percentage plays. So, first serve percentage is always going to be huge. Think people realize, or players should realize, that a lot more balls go through the middle of the court than they actually realize. There's always this kind of fear or respect for people going down the line, because those also make the highlights. Like if someone rips a return winner down the line, like, oh my god, that was so amazing. But if in your head you can realize that happens maybe 1 out of 10 times, 2 out of 10 times, and by you crunching the middle hard, you win maybe 7 or 8 out of 10 points, then I think you're going to be much happier than getting that return winner down the line back a lot. So I would say those two things are big: keeping your first serve percentage up as much as you can, but also making sure it's effective. Starting position as a net player, I think a lot of players can learn. I was fortunate enough this year to play with a British player for a long time who gets taught the Louis Quillet system. So I actually gained a lot of knowledge about foot positioning, net positioning, and stuff like that. But I would say for starters, block the middle a lot more than you think you might.
It's funny because like one of the tactics that we observed, like even like recently, right, is the body forehand and cutting off the middle basically and forcing them to go like down the line basically is incredibly effective, right? Especially like someone like you who's covering the middle 6'4", like big wingspan. It's almost impossible for them to pass you, right? And the other thing we feel like we've noticed a lot is like most players' backhands returns especially are significantly better than their forehand returns, and it feels like the more you're able to put pressure on that side, the higher chance you have of like producing getting a good like poach volley or even anything like that, right?
Sure. Yeah, and like you said, all of this comes also back to who's on the other side returning. But it feels like for a lot of players at this level and also at the main tour level, there's this stigma that if you can break through someone's forehand, that's going to mess with the rest of their game. For a lot of players, the forehand is the attacking stroke. It's their weapon that they like to use. So if you can make them feel like it's not necessarily a weakness, but you can win points on that side against them often, then usually other parts of their game start to suffer as well, which is quite interesting to notice. But most of for me, at least in my team, is you just go by the percentages of how often are you going to win a point while you serve here, and you go, your net player does this. And I haven't encountered anyone so far that has a return or a stroke so good that you just have to avoid it. So it more so comes down to trusting your own strokes and your own tactics, regardless of whether it's a forehand or a backhand. It's more so just the position of where you can put the ball and how uncomfortable you can make it for your opponents on the second and third shot.
100%. I mean, and so much of the strategy talk is, I need to hit here, I need to hit here, but really at a high level, it comes down to play to your strengths and attack the opponent's weaknesses, right? And play the percentages, and that's what a lot of it has been about in terms of developing a strategy.
Yeah, and I think what I've come to realize more as well is that something that may seem like it's not working in the beginning can pay off a lot at the end of the match or at the end of the set. One thing that I like to keep saying to myself is just keep building. A lot of players, especially when they feel like they have nothing to lose, they may play great for 4, 5, 6 games in the first set, and they're serving bombs or they're returning well or volleying exactly where they need to. There's always going to come a point in a match or in a set where your habits are going to come through. And, if you can build those good habits early in the match, there's going to come a point in the set or in the match where you're going to get the opportunity to really exploit those habits. And then it's just a matter of executing. But in order to get to that point of execution, you have to be willing to lose points a certain way early in the match to get the payoff later when they may seem like it's not working or something like that. And there's been plenty of matches for me where I've had to realize, look, we have to do this early on just to establish what we want to do later in their match. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to matter if you win a set 6-2 or if you win a set 7-6. And, in a lot of ways, you may want to actually win a set 7-6 and struggle a bit. Because if it goes too easy in the beginning, you might start either being a little bit too relaxed or opponent starts to push back and stuff like that. And yeah, so just keep building for later payoffs, delayed gratification.
Man, this is free game for the listeners. I can't emphasize enough how important this concept is, because me and P witnessed it in Fairfield when we were watching the dubs there. You have to be willing to lose points. And I think the sting of that forehand pass is still 1 point. And you just have to, recognize that. And it's something that's very, very hard to do. And I'm sure it's taken a little bit of, discipline for you to get where you're at now and accept that there are going to be a couple points that you lose in the process of winning a match. Do you think that's a little bit different from singles? Because I feel like singles, you kind of do want to beat your head against the wall with a particular strategy sometimes. Whereas doubles, I think that variety pays off more often than not, it seems.
Sure. Yeah, it's obviously I'm not playing as many singles matches as I am playing doubles matches. I am still trying to play it as much as I can. I think the element of time in a singles match has a lot to do with it, where at least for me, I always feel like I have more time in a singles match to adjust and to figure out the opponent compared to a doubles match. So I think there's a lot more adaptability there, and I think also because you're hitting every shot yourself in a singles match, I think you can rely on yourself a little bit more, and also that makes it easier to exploit only one person's weakness. Where in doubles, like you said, you have to be willing to lose points as long as they're the right patterns and the right intention. And the interesting part is that sometimes a strategy is also based on the connection between two partners rather than a single weakness on the court. But whereas in singles, that strategy is always going to be based on that opponent's weakness. But even then, there's always going to be an ebb and flow of a match where you can actually create those ebbs and flows, if that makes sense. You can kind of entrance your opponent into a state of mind that's much more favorable to you, or let's say a rhythm of the match or the pace of play. Whereas in doubles, it's more so how is the synergy between your two opponents, and how can you pull someone out of position that makes his opponent a lot more frustrated or a lot more uncertain about what they're doing. So I think there's a different, I wouldn't say there's a different level, because both singles and double strategy can be very sophisticated, but there's more interplay in, I think, in double strategy than there is in single strategy.
And this is exactly the type of discipline that's like brought us to where you're currently at right now, right? Like we just, as we've kind of talked about, fresh off a challenger title, playing another one right now. I'm curious, like where do we go from here? Well, like what are your goals from this point, right? Like you're super close to like breaking the top 100, and I'm curious like what your goals are for the rest of the year and moving forward now.
Yeah, so I've got this event and two more in Europe after this. Yeah, it's always easy to say you want to win all of them.
Yeah.
It'd be weird if that isn't your goal, but I think I've really made a big jump forwards in my training block actually last week, where it's a shift in mentality, and I think I want to, for me to end the year well, is to feel like I can use this mentality in every single match that I play. I may lose tomorrow and I may lose two first rounds. As long as I do it in a way that I know is productive for next year, then I'm going to be okay with that. I'm not going to be okay with losing, because losing always always sucks and always is going to hurt. But um, yeah, and then I think for me, in order to take the next step, there have been certain, I think, personality traits that I need to fire more, and personality traits that I need to change or kind of adjust, um, to make me realize, I think, the potential that is in me. Like my career high, I think, is 104. So I've been close to where I want to go. Realistically, I think the ranking range between where I am now and where I need to be in order to start playing Grand Slams and the ATPs, I think is probably the hardest jump to make in terms of pathway. So even though it feels like the level is there to play at that higher level, you're gonna need to win those matches. It almost feels like you're at that futures qualifying again, where you may win 3-4 matches, but you're not seeing the reward quite yet. So I basically, my goal for next year is to play my first Grand Slam based on my ranking. I've been close, not necessarily based on ranking, but I've been a high alternate a few times.
Yeah.
So I've gotten the taste, but also the taste of, I guess, disappointment on the last days. But
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels now more than ever that I know exactly what I need to do in order to get myself to the next level. And in a way that's going to sound very selfish, I've always been a player that likes to have collaboration and likes to have a system with his partner. And I would love to have somebody that you can make the jump together with. But that's just going to be extremely tough. So I've come to realize that at this level, I need to be able to win with anybody, really. And once you get through that ranking, once you make that jump, then I think it's a better time, or a more appropriate time, to start thinking about partnerships and systems like that. So I think that mentality shift based on where I'm at and where I need to be, and also for how long I've been kind of in this ranking range. Because at my career high was 2 years ago, right after or during the pandemic, I guess. You know, it's going to come down to me how long I'm going to be at this level. And obviously, of course, there are going to be external factors in play, like who you're playing and what your draw is and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm going to need to become a little bit more of a selfish athlete, if that makes sense. And that's a really interesting transition for me, because that's not in my nature. So it's going to help me just become a better person as well. So I'm really excited. For not for the first time, but I think for the time being now, I have a clear vision of really what I want to see out of myself for the rest of this year, but also for next year.
And I mean, like this, what you've just described basically hits on the philosophies from IMG to Pacific to like the early tour to now, right? Like focus on day by day, and the results will and the work will eventually like take care of itself, right? And like it's great to see that across like I mean, you've been playing for so long, right? And the work is still the work, the motivation, everything is still like there in order to continue to get better. And so obviously you got two fans in us who are gonna who will root for you as you play in your first Grand Slam next year.
Yeah, thanks. And sometimes it's also good for myself to zoom out and take a step back and thinking back to those IMG and those college days where I never actually expected myself to be in this position. And now that I'm in this position, I think to have the goals of realizing that you can play at the top level and that you deserve to be there just based on your results is something that I would have never dreamt of literally when I just started playing tennis or throughout my collegiate career. So sometimes when I feel a little bit stuck or I feel like frustrated of where I am or results, then it's always helpful for me to zoom out and say, what would you say to little 17-year-old Sem right now of dreaming about playing a Grand Slam or the ultimate goal of playing Davis Cup and stuff like that? I don't think he would have even realized that would be in the cards at the moment. So it's that combination of hunger and determination paired with a little side of humility and gratitude for where I am that I think is going to make a good cocktail for success next year.
Well, Sam, we really appreciate the time, and this has been a fantastic story. We've kept you on for a pretty long time. The night before, you got some matches coming up, so we'll let you go. But again, we really appreciate the time. Hope to see you, maybe even at the U.S. Open, next year. I think that would be phenomenal.
Yeah. I promise you, I'll try my hardest to make it happen. Yeah, again, those are the pinnacles of our sport, and that's where you want to be. But really, thanks to you guys for the interest and wanting to share my story. I think one thing about the challengers and the futures that people often overlook, probably just because they don't get to see it, is they're very, very cool stories on both of these tours. And there are perspectives from all over the world that everybody can learn from. So I appreciate what you guys are doing and sharing those stories. So I look forward to continuing to listen to what you guys are doing.
We'll close it off on this note. One of our all-time favorite quotes that we heard about: "The road to the top goes through Fairfield," and that's the tour. That's the story. That's the story. That's the story to the top in general. The road goes through Egypt. It goes through Fairfield. It goes through like the grind, right, before you get to the top. And so you'll have our continued support as you continue to push forward. And we can't thank you enough for doing this, Sam.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. I hope to be back soon.